Charles, you are speaking about the medical and evolutionary model of craniosacral biodynamics. What is the difference between these two perspectives?
There's a number of differences between the medical model and the evolutionary model. In the medical model, there's a set of methods that we use, and the first method is we objectify. So we set up a dual relationship where we're the doctor or the practitioner, and the patient or the client is on the table. And the practitioner is going to evaluate the problems inside the client or the patient. And then there's a plan that's established for fixing the problems that are discovered. And so there's this whole relationship where doctor, patient, or therapist, client, and evaluation usually going into the body from a craniosacral point of view and evaluating the system, the craniosacral system, and based on what's found to do cranial techniques to balance the imbalances that were discovered. And so that process works, but on some level, it's not guaranteed that it works. And so in the evolutionary, all that is removed. There's no objectification. So instead of there being a practitioner and a client separated, there are two people who both have the same wisdom in their own bodies, the breath of life, in the client's body, in the practitioner's body. And by touch, there's a process where there's a communication between the wisdom in the client's body, the wisdom in the practitioner's body. And if the practitioner is inside themselves, sensing their own inner qualities, then they will receive the information direct from the wisdom in the client's body. And then if they're surrendered to that process inside themselves, they're guided in their touch. So there's no knowing ahead of time, there's no plan ahead of time. As a matter of fact, while touching, you don't really know why you are touching. You know afterwards because the client reports their what happened, the benefits, and you go, oh, okay, so that's what happened. So it's retrospective knowing, in other words, after the fact of the doing. And the final thing is that when touching on a client in the evolutionary, there's no touching to do anything. No touching to fix, to change, to modify. It's just touch. And then resonance to resonance through the touch creates that conversation and then the guidance.
Can you tell us about the reason why there is orientation to SA note so important in this work?
Yeah. Well, embryologically, when we were very young as an embryo, I don't know exactly the date, but early, before there were organs, before there was a heart, the sinoatrial node cells surrounded the whole embryo, and basically on the edges of the embryo, and the pulsing of the sinoatrial node cells created a field, a pulsing field that actually began to create the body. So the heart field, which is actually emanated from the sinoatrial node, made the body. That same heart field, when you get older, you're born and you live your life, is managing the body, the heartbeat, the blood flow, the liver, the kidneys, the pH, everything, the immune functions, the hormonal balance, the nervous system, everything is orchestrated by this heart field. And as we get older in our 9, 10, and on age, that same power starts to develop our capacity to think for ourselves, to cognize, to take something and hold it, and then can develop a goal or a plan and then achieve it in life. And once we get a little bit even more older, in our 30s, 40s, that power becomes the evolutionary forces that bring us back to wholeness. And so the power that made the body, maintains the body, heals the body, and evolves our consciousness. And that power comes from the emanation from the sinoatrial node. And so accessing that is you're in the seat inside the field that already knows what's happening. Sutherland called that the tide. And since Sutherland, modern times have developed enough information that tide is actually a harmonic of the field of the sinoatrial node, the pulsing field.
Are there any other basic principles of this approach that you would like to mention?
Yeah, a few. One, remember there's no objectification, so being careful if we're already trained in medical model, even medical model biodynamics, that we don't objectify the person on the table, that make them a separate person over there that we as practitioners are going to fix based on some sort of a plan due to our touch and our sensing of what's happening with the person on the table, their processes, their system, and then basing our treatment on that. That's something that we don't do in biodynamics. So it's challenging if we're already trained in medical model, which most of us are. So there's a lot of unlearning to do. No objectification, no creating anything for the patient or the person on the table, the client, out of ourselves, but letting the power inside them determine the space, the distance, the containment, and all the boundaries even. And all we're doing is holding a space inside of ourselves and resting in that space and letting the qualities move us instinctually in a way where we don't know why we're being moved, we just are allowing that. And so it's a really, there's a lot of backing up to do from I'm a practitioner, I know what to do, I have skills, I trained in those skills, here are the skills I'm going to apply, they're going to get well because of it, and I'm going to use them. Well, all of that has to be brought back in to a point of, I don't know. I don't know how a cell works. How can I know how a 50 trillion cell human being works? I don't know how this person has lived their whole lives. I don't know what they need right now. I don't know what's the next thing for them in their evolution. I can't possibly know any of that. So if I'm honest with the truth of the situation, I can then access something that was there when that person was born, has been there all along in their lives, and has a sequence that even now, without me touching them, is already trying to happen. And then the client is only supported by our relaxation into the wisdom, and by touching, they relax. And hopefully they receive and allow the process for themselves. And then that can start a session.
I know that you teach also people who are not trained in any osteopathy or body work.
Yeah.
So is it possible for everybody to teach or to have something from this approach? If
they are willing to do the practices, they're receptive to the practices, and they're disciplined in using them, it's actually easier for a person who's never been trained in the medical model approaches, because they don't have anything to unlearn first. Because as a practitioner, it's a habit. Before we even know it, we're touching the person and we're in their bodies, we're analyzing, we're reading, we're taking care of them, we're handling their process for them, and none of that has to be done with someone who's never touched. So they just come in pure innocence, and they learn these principles of abiding inside, in touch with not any notion of what to do or even knowing what is happening. And so in a way, they can go deeper faster. Now, the truth is that a practitioner, once they reduce those habits of efference, we call them efference, leaving my body as practitioner and going to the body of the client. Once they stop that, then of course they're going to be more skilled because they already know how to work and be with. A new person won't be as skilled in the contacts and as comfortable, but in terms of the depth, they actually, it's very deep. And so it's very satisfying to watch people never touched in their lives to touch. And what we talk about in this teaching model occurs in a brand new person who's never touched before. It was astonishing to discover that. I didn't know that ahead of time.
You are talking about gradually building ability to be present with things that are happening. So why is it so important? Or how does it help?
That's a good question. It's a very refined question, because what happens in this work, because it's an evolutionary model, is the breath of life illuminates, shines the light on, and brings to consciousness all the parts of us that have blocked the flow of the breath of life in the body. Unconsciously, because we were harmed, wounded, traumatized. And so in our lives we developed a personality, an ego structure that has complexes and that has drives and that has recoils away from the potency of the breath of life. And for better or worse, once we start to open to that power, that unerring potency, parts of ourselves that are hidden start to come up, and the practice is to learn how to be with those parts without running from them, without trying to control them and shut them down, but just be present to them. And so once we do that with one piece of ourselves, and we get some strength to be present, but then because we're stronger, the next part comes up that's even more powerful, and we then have to be with that one. And it goes on like that until we develop this incredible capacity for presence that actually is still preparation. It's like practice for the real game. Meeting our own parts that have for our lifetime been blocking this presence inside ourselves. After we've navigated enough of those, we then begin to come face to face with the power of the breath of life. Because most of our lives we spent suppressing that power, holding it back, holding it down, hiding it from ourselves and especially from other people. And now it's starting to come up. And if we haven't developed the presence, the unwaveringness of the presence, or the muscles of presence, we won't be able to stand it. And we'll leave our bodies, or we'll shut down, or we'll try to control it, or we'll suppress it, just like we had done with all of our emotions and traumas. So the facing yourself, your own parts that have been built from your life biography, gives you the strength of presence to be with the true power of the breath of life, which is to the ego is extremely overwhelming. So that's what's important about facing yourself and the illuminated quality of the breath of life.
Is it possible to tell shortly how can this work could help to clients?
Yeah. Because people go, well, why you're doing nothing, and nothing's happening. You're not having a treatment plan. You're not treating anything. How can anything happen to this person? What are you doing? You're wasting your time and their money and all of that. But health is a side effect of evolution. In other words, we can't evolve until we're healthy. All the fragmented parts of ourselves from our traumas that are hidden actually is a portion of why we get ill, why we get sick, or why we have, quote, diseases. And remember that the illuminative quality of the breath of life begins to resolve those hidden unconscious processes that are usually emotional, psychological, that can then turn to physical. That's besides that we might hurt ourselves in a sport event or get injured in a car or something like that. Then the breath of life builds the health of the body so that it can withstand the power when the breath of life finally reveals itself. So a client comes in and they may not necessarily come in for symptom relief, and they may not even mention symptom relief, but many times symptoms that they didn't even consider as part of this disappear. And maybe the practitioner doesn't know about it, the client doesn't mention it, and they still go away. So in a way, health is a part of it, but it's not the focus. But it's inherent to evolution. You can't evolve if you're broken. It's just impossible. If you're broken and barely able to function in life, you can't withstand being with the breath of life. And there's protection. You know, the breath of life is not about breaking people that are already broken and breaking them down more. It's about bringing them back to wholeness and function. So that's what happens in a session. And I learned that not because I knew it ahead of time. I learned it by offering this, and people's symptoms that they never even mentioned would disappear. And I would go, wow.
Can you tell us some hints for the daily life? What can be useful?
And that's big because as a practitioner, it's one thing to do these practices in the room, the treatment room, and then you go home and you turn all that off and you become, your normal person. This work is much more fruitful meaning it's more successful, when you take these practices into your personal life. So you don't stop the practices when you walk out the session door. You're still orienting on the inside. You're still letting the inner qualities from your inner body space guide you, even with what to eat, how much to do, who to see, who not to see, how long to go to a party, whether to go to a party, how much sleep you get, on and on. So you begin to discover the things that shut down your contact with these inner qualities, and you decide that you're no longer going to do the things that close your body down to the contact. That's one, and that's more daily lifestyle. But really and truly, you need to start a daily practice of the meditation practices that we do before we touch. And if we do that every single day, we don't even have to think about, how do I work this out for myself? How do I discover a plan to make me keep this? The guidance does that, because you start to feel yourself losing it, and you don't want to lose it. And you say, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to do that, because I know what will happen, especially from experience. Because you don't know at first, but then you go out and you drink too many Prague beers. And you have a headache, and you wake up in the middle of the night with a headache, and then you got to get up and see 5 people, and you see 5 people with a headache, and you go, okay, I'm going to have fewer beers tonight when I go out, and see where your limits are with relative to the body itself. And of course, it's always practice. But if we want to keep this alive in ourselves and an unbroken continuity of contact, we have to adjust our lifestyles. We can't just live mindlessly. So there has to be some mindfulness about how we live, but based on what brings more connection as opposed to what breaks the connection, and then choose. I'm going to keep the connection, so here's my lifestyle. It's personal for everybody.
And is it useful to really teach it also our clients? Explain.
Thank you. I'm so happy you brought that up, because yes, some clients not necessarily, because they're not really interested and they just want to lay there and get sessions, and maybe they want symptoms to be treated and that. But some people you notice, you sense that they really want to take this into their personal lives. And actually, if we've seen them enough over enough time, almost everybody will get to that place if they stay with this work. Because this work is very different, because we don't ask them what's hurting and what feels better and how the knee is, and they know that that's not the forefront of the practice. So the people that really understand that, we give them the same practices, and then they can work with those practices on the table and become more and more receptive to these powerful surges of the breath of life, and learn how to be with what also comes up in themselves. So the practice for the practitioner is the same as it is for the client, and that's why there's no need for objectivity. It's two fellow people on the same path, journeying together, trying to connect with this inner mystery that's in both of us, and it's also around both of us. And so there's no need to go, I know more than you do, or you know more than I do. It's simply, we're going to join together in this, and hopefully that'll help for both of us. Because, I'll say one more thing. In a session, a practitioner gets the session as much as the person on the table, the client. They're both receiving a session, even though the person giving it is getting the credit.
Mm-hmm. And can you say us how was your story? How you get to this work?
Myself?
Yes.
My personal story?
Yes, your personal story.
That could be a long one, but I'll make it short.
Short one.
A short, the elevator version. Well, the first time I ever got a cranial session, I didn't go in for a symptom. I went in because an eye doctor friend of mine mentioned the word cranial. And for some reason, I'd never heard of it, and I went crazy. I just went, what? Cranial? And I looked it up, and he gave me some books. And so I went and got a session, one cranial session from this doctor in California in 1973. And my consciousness was expanded for 30 days. And I went even crazier in a good way and said, I have to do this. I want to do this for my life. This is my destiny, to learn this work and to offer it to other people for the evolution of consciousness. And then, of course, the training and the practicalities of practicing and making the money and paying the student loans and all of that went into the background, the evolutionary part. But years later, 20 years or so later, it reconnected. In the 20 years from the training to that point, I sort of lost it, and I could feel something going in the background, and I felt missing, but I couldn't connect what it was. And then finally, when I actually moved out of New York and moved back to California, a few years back to California, it all came back, and I went, oh yeah, I forgot about this evolutionary. And then biodynamics came. And probably what happened is biodynamics started just coming, and then I realized, oh yeah, that's why I started this. But I'd forgotten for 20 years. And so then I began to write about this work now. That the book Stillness turned out to be the result of. Yeah.